7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
This quote, despite coming from a rather infamous game, which to be honest I actually like, has become one of the most iconic quotes from Resident Evil's most iconic antagonist, Albert Wesker. So naturally, when this devilish scientist finally made his way into the horror show of Dead by Daylight, I wondered if it was possible. Could Albert Wesker win a match of Dead by Daylight in less than 7 minutes? Are you fucking kidding me? I was almost done with this fucking script. Okay, so we know you can obviously do it, and a lot of people have, but could I win with Wesker in 7 minutes? That was something I was itching to figure out for myself. Before we get into this, I should probably discuss why I would undertake a challenge like this. Because while there was obviously the meme value for doing it, the big thing that spurred me to try this was simply the fact that I wanted to improve at Wesker. See, for the longest time, he was one of my most wanted killers to be added to this game, second only to the Graboid. And when he was finally added, I was so excited to give him a try. But after playing him for a bit, I just couldn't get the hang of him. I knew he wasn't objectively bad, but he just wasn't clicking with me, and getting destroyed every match trying to practice him really killed my motivation to play him. But recently I decided to give him some more practice in bot games, and decided to challenge myself by doing it in 7 minutes or less, essentially pushing myself to the limit to force myself to improve at him by improving at his fundamentals. And I actually did improve greatly during this process, and it got me wondering, could I do it in an actual PvP match? Real players are going to be a lot harder to beat than bots because, well, they actually play the game properly, but could I actually have gotten good enough to actually beat them? That was something I wanted to see if I could do. But during these practice games, even with bots, I did begin to clue into some things that were going to make it a bit tricky once I tried it in PvP. 7 minutes was not a lot of time to kill people. For reference, if I hooked everyone 3 times each, for a total of 12 hooks, and every chase lasted 30 seconds, that means 6 minutes were already used up, meaning I only have a minute of leeway to do everything else. And while I think 30 seconds average is fine, and was what I was aiming for during this challenge, I needed to figure out a way to move the needle in other areas. Oh, and in case you were wondering, the timer for the match starts once the match begins and it goes into the first person mode, and ends when I get sent back to the lobby. You might think it's better to stop the timer once I got everyone down and dying, or was boring the last survivor, but I felt that if a survivor played well enough to waste enough time that I would lose at the very end, I deserved to lose that as there was more room to improve. Plus this gave me a very clear time when I should be stopping and starting the timer, when I gained control of the killer and when I lost it. So I began creating and defining a strategy for this challenge, the most important of which was figuring out what my loadout was going to be. The perks I was going to take were going to be what helped me the most when it came to saving time, so I needed to nail down which ones I was going to use. I was able to quickly rule out a lot of perks immediately though, as every single slowdown perk was off the table. I need to end the match quickly, not drag it out, and if survivors were able to gen rush me, that just meant a failed attempt ended quickly. My next thought was that I could run a build that allowed me to snowball a lead, and my immediate thought for that went to a slugging build. Infectious Fright, Sloppy Butcher, and Deerstalker. Sloppy would make it harder for them to heal up, Infectious would allow me to find survivors nearby me when I down someone, and Deerstalker would allow me to find the slugged survivors, which would allow me to save time trying to find them at the end of the game. Infectious especially seemed very good on Wesker because he has a naturally larger terror radius, but in practice there was a lot of flaws. For one of the major reasons why the slugging build worked so well was because of its 4th perk, Knockout, preventing survivors from seeing the slug. But due to the rampant success of slugging, it got changed to be an anti-pre-drop perk, making the build a lot less powerful. There were other ways of hindering the survivor's vision, such as with blindness, but none of them could make up for the loss of Knockout. Mangled and Hemorrhage also got nerfed, to now only last a set amount of time instead of till fully healed. On top of that, slugging became a lot less powerful thanks to the new perk Conviction, which allows survivors to temporarily pick themselves back up, allowing them to get back to their team, and making you lose their location. But probably the biggest hindrance for this was actually part of Wesker himself. In case you need a refresher on what he does, Wesker has a dash attack that can grab and infect survivors. When he grabs them, he will either then slam them into a wall, or throw them depending on if he's near enough to a wall when he grabs them. And if he gets to slam and down someone, which is what's going to happen with most of your hits, he'll automatically pick up the survivor, which does save us time when grabbing them for hooking, but waste time when we're looking to slug, since we now need to drop them. Literally the only benefit that came from this was the fact that the slugged survivor doesn't lose their infection progress, so that plan was off the table. But since we were grabbing people automatically, my next thought was to instead grab agitation. This increases the killer's carrying speed by about 0.5 meters per second, which doesn't sound like much on paper, but it does have some uses. The idea was to shave off any seconds I could, and by getting survivors to the hook sooner, especially since it was something I was constantly doing, that was going to save me a decent amount of time throughout the match. So while it was only 0.5 on its own, it was going to add up. With this idea of shaving whatever time I could in mind, I opted to go with Brutal Strength and Bamboozle for my next 2 perks, which was a good call. Both of these perks are very common on Wesker, as they help him in chase immensely. Brutal Strength breaks pallets faster, which can allow you to gen chases much quicker, which is what Wesker excels at. This is especially good against strong pallets that survivors can easily loop around. Strong pallets that are on longer loops can be instead countered by using your power to vault them, as survivors won't be able to loop back around in time before taking a hit. Of course, knowing what pallets you can do this on would require experience and practicing, which is exactly what this challenge was for. Bamboozle, meanwhile, is dealing with vaults, letting us get over them faster. Now, it is worth noting that Wesker already has an insanely fast vault speed with his power, even with the brief cooldown after it. Now, the downside to this is that with the fast vault, you can actually slip by right past him. But that's where the second effect of Bamboozle comes in, blocking the last window you vault over. With that, the first 3 perks were decided on, but I had one final perk slot that I needed, and this one took a while to figure out. My initial idea was Fire Up, since doing the gens faster would lead to me having faster action speeds, and I didn't really care if they got done, but there was the reality that if I did as well as I needed to in order to win the challenge, I might end up snowballing too hard with no gens getting done. This was also the same reason why Coup de Grace was off the table. There was multiple other perks that I did consider for this, from Devour Hope to Forever Entwined, Plaything, but none of them really stuck for me. The only one I want to go into detail about is Mad Grit, because I do feel there is something to note about it. The reason I considered this was because one of the ways I could have seen myself winning this was if survivors played too altruistically, and since I had agitation, I could use Mad Grit and agitation to punish them and get a lot of free downs. But this kind of felt like I was cheating the challenge. I was trying to do this to get better at Wesker, so using something that would essentially cheese out the kills didn't really fit the spirit of it. So I decided that something like that wasn't really in the cards. Ultimately, I decided to ask some of my friends for their opinions, and my friend Gim, who may have a tiny bit more knowledge on this game than me, actually gave me a far different suggestion than what I was thinking, that I should take Agitation off and replace it with a 2-card combo, either Spirit Fury Enduring, or Friends Till the End Nemesis. Now, Enduring Spirit was one I was not looking to try. While it was able to end chases quickly, and could lead to some downs I wouldn't have otherwise gotten, it had a lot of issues. Most notably, it was only going to work once per survivor, or once period against a Swift, before survivors started playing more smart and pre-dropping all the pallets. Sure, it could be more aggressive with my dashes to force value, but not only was that punished if I couldn't get into position in time, but could also be punished if they just greeted the loop. Fremesis, meanwhile, was a lot more interesting. In case you don't know what these two do, Friends Till the End triggers whenever you hook a survivor. If it's the obsession, a random survivor will scream and become the obsession, and if it's the non-obsession, the obsession will become exposed and have their aura revealed to you. This can allow you to find the obsession to start a chase quickly and potentially instantly down them. The exposed effect was actually the part of this that I was the least interested in, as the real value came from the aura reveal. I mean, sure, if I could get the down, I absolutely would take it, but on bigger maps, the time it would take to get over there combined with the time spent actually in chase would render this less than useful. The aura reveal, meanwhile, allowed me to quickly start a chase with a new survivor, cutting down on what was one of the biggest time wasters, looking for a new survivor without any clues on where they were. But that's only if I hooked the non-obsession, and I was being directed at the obsession, so I wouldn't be able to get the aura reveal on the next person since they would just scream, so it didn't do as much as it seemed. That's where Nemesis came in. Nemesis causes anyone who blinds you or stuns you to become the obsession, which can help if I play aggressive or mess up near a pallet, but the real power comes from its second effect. Whenever the obsession changes for whatever reason, the new obsession becomes oblivious and has their aura revealed to you. This means hooking any survivor gives you a new target to go after, speeding up the match immensely, but in this case, it's actually even better than before because of the Oblivious status effect. Oblivious removes the heartbeat that survivors get, which is already good on most killers, but for Wesker specifically, this is even better. Wesker has one of the largest areas in the game at 40 meters, which gives people ample warning for when he's showing up. so removing it can catch people off guard, especially since Wesker is one of the quietest killers in the game, barely making any noise when he walks. In fact, this was the reason why I did consider Plaything for this, though I felt it was a bit too low impact, especially since it did nothing with the first chases. Still, I wasn't 100% sold on it just yet. So I decided to hop into a practice match with the timer running to see how I did, and I got it under 7 minutes on the first try. In fact, I was consistently getting it within time, which I hadn't been seeing as much of while testing other builds, so it was pretty clear that this combo was exactly what I was looking for. We now have all 4 of our perks set out. There was one concern though about making the change off of agitation, that being able to consistently get to hooks with the extra speed, especially if the nearest one gets sabotaged or blocked. But thankfully, we had a way to work around this without using one of our perk slots. Offerings. Since we were trying to end the game quickly, we weren't going to be bringing our usual blood point offerings. We probably weren't getting that many to begin with, and instead wanted one that could tip the match in our favor, and the best one for this are the Oak offerings. Putrid Oak specifically decreases the minimum distance between hooks by 3.5 meters, not only allowing them to be closer, but giving more room for additional hooks to spawn. What also helps is that this is an offering that comes in 3 different rarities, so if we ran out the very rare Putrid one, I could switch to the rare Rotten one instead. It also helps for these offerings that there wasn't really anything else that I wanted to take over them. Shroud of Vanishing would prevent survivors from using offerings to split up, but that wasn't as big of a concern for me. Emoys were actually terrible for me, believe it or not. Since they could be only used on Death Hook, I would rather hook them up and let them die while chasing someone else instead of spending 13 seconds killing them myself. Map offerings were the only other thing that was worth considering aside from Oaks, and this one did have a bit more nuance to it. Obviously you want a map that benefits the killer, but what I also realized during testing was that map size was a massive factor on whether or not I could do this. If a map was too big and survivors were on the opposite side of it all the time, it would take so much time to travel across the map that it would add up and potentially kill the run. If maps were an issue, I'd be inclined to try and skew the odds in my favor, even if it was just a 1 in 5 chance of getting the map. As for which maps I wanted, the main ones I wanted was smaller ones, so Dead Dog Saloon was especially given, since it was the most kill-side map in the game, but I also found myself having extremely good times on Forsaken Boneyard. That may seem strange given how strong Area of Crows used to be, but that map was changed to be much smaller, and is now square-shaped instead of a long rectangle, making it easier to traverse. And I found a lot of the loops weren't that bad for Wesker. It also helps that Dead Sands was added too, another very small map. The last thing I needed to decide on were what my add-ons would be, and after a bit of testing and talk with my friend, I went with the classic combo of Unicorn Medallion and Gold Chalice. Now, when I started doing this, I was actually not looking to use Unicorn Medallion, because I didn't want to get the muscle memory of using the dashes that was slightly different than the base one. But at the point when I was deciding what add-ons I wanted for the real match, I had already been practicing a lot with the base time, so I felt comfortable enough to give it a shot. And yeah, it is a lot better for this challenge. Not only does having a shorter first dash make it a lot deadlier and allow you to get around corners easier, a shorter second dash makes missing someone from afar a bit less punishing, whereas before you would just fly off to fucking Saturn. And having Golden Challenge to extend the grab makes hitting them into a wall easier, though I did spend a lot of time practicing turning right as I grabbed someone, so that on straightaways it was a lot easier to get those downs. I spent a couple more days refining my gameplay and customs before deciding to hop into a real match, all of which culminated in one final practice match, ending with an insane time of 3 minutes 35 seconds. It was at that point that I knew I was ready. Our plan set, build ready, and practice done, I finally set off to complete this challenge. Has all of my training finally made me a better Wesker against actual people? Let's find out. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to start this challenge right as 2v8 came out. So after a 10-minute queue, I finally got a match, and was ready to give it my all. On RPD West, which is the survivor-sided version of this map. Not only being a decently big map that is hard to navigate, but the west side has a lot of strong areas that was going to make my job a lot harder. Thankfully, I found a survivor within 2 seconds of the match starting, and chased them towards the east side of the map, which was a lot better for me. Case in point, this loop right here, which is extremely bad for survivors. Admittedly, I didn't play it fantastically. I probably should have used my power here, though my reason not to was that I thought she'd run away after I hit her, so better to use it to catch up. But even with 2 whiffed attacks, I still downed her in 30 seconds, which was the average I was aiming for. And it arguably could have been better that she made distance towards the door, because while I could have downed her and hooked her right by the hook she was looping by, being put near the entrance allowed me to interrupt 2 survivors that were working there, which included the Obsession. This was fantastic. Now if I hook Meg, I could go after the Obsession with him being exposed, or the other girl if she's out of position, and I don't have to traverse the map looking for people. This was a massive time save. Or at least it would have been if Meg didn't escape. I didn't check any of the profiles of people before starting the match, since people grouping wasn't going to change me fighting them. I can't just run away from Swiss forever. I need to face them to improve. So I didn't know that Meg and Jill were a duo, with both of them turned out to be running a sabotage build. So while I was able to get a hit on Jill, she broke the only hook I was able to get near and allowed Meg to escape with Breakout, meaning the first chase I had ultimately led to nothing. This is actually a situation where going for the Mad Grit Agi combo would have paid off immensely, but again, I didn't want that to be how I won this. And I'm saying this like it was a massive blow, but the truth is I caught up and down Meg in 10 seconds, so it wasn't really... Is Jonah AFK? Oh, well that actually makes it even worse than if I did the combo. Now we're playing a match where I have an unfair advantage because they're down a player at this point, when they desperately need one. So I guess this technically means winning with the time would be dubious, which isn't fun. The Jill tries the Sabo again for her buddy, but fails this time, and I'm able to hook her, and after a short altercation, I down the ace, actually getting value out of the exposed. 1 minute, 45 seconds was all it took to bring down everyone. At least, that's how it would be under normal circumstances, but the Jill actually had Unbreakable, which she used to pick herself up as soon as I grabbed Ace. Now, I could have figured she would do this, especially since she and her teammate didn't use the Abandon feature at this point, which actually wouldn't have been available if I didn't down the Jonah, adding on to how scuffed I made this match. But I was actually okay with this happening, not just because it made the match more interesting, but it felt a bit more fair for them to get a reset, given that I did down the AFK Jonah, who they left slugged on the ground. I guess that makes sense given he was AFK. Another short chase with Meg later, where she once again tries to play this ballot, and I go back to where Jonah is, seeing if I can cut off Jill, and hey, look at that. I do when I down her thanks to Bamboozled. Ace does actually go in for the save on Jonah, and oh hey, he's back. In hindsight, the correct play would have been to actually tunnel him out, given he is running towards Meg, which is a place without any safe pallets, and Ace would only be able to go back and heal Jill, meaning Meg would likely die on hook. But come on, this guy just got back. I'm not gonna be mean and tunnel him out. This is a challenge to get better at the game, not be an asshole. Plus, I wanted to have a chase with this Ace, since I only had a brief one with him earlier. And oh boy, did I misplay here. I did get a slap on him, but seeing as he was running towards a bad side of the map, I decided to instead go back and try to stop the others from picking up Jill, which they actually didn't even try to do, as both of them were instead cleansing their infection in the outdoors section. Weird choice and ultimately not good, as I was able to quickly go over there and down Jonah, before hooking him by the stairs. Meg was probably still outside, though I thought she'd try running around to unhook Jill or get her healed by Ace. So I instead went after the Ace, who finally popped the first gen of the game, and like the last chase with him, I messed up misjudging how he was gonna play, but as you may have been noticing, most of these misplays are only adding about 10 seconds to the time, as I simply walked around to pressure him to the east side before vaulting over the same pallet as him, making use of how long this loop was to make it impossible for him to beat me to it. And that's why we make sure to vault over pallets instead of breaking all of them. It was here, however, that being nice and all of those misplays did finally start to catch up to me, as we only had 1:30 left to end the match, and no one was dead. 3 people were on Death Hook, but none of them had fallen, so it was an uphill battle for me, especially since I had to waste a fair bit of time getting across the map to where the others were. Thankfully, there was a silver lining, as the 3 of them decided to heal on their hook, but Jill positioned herself perfectly for me to grab her, allowing me to both down her and re-injure Jonah. And to add on to it, Meg tried to sabotage the hook, and while she did break it, she went down herself for it, meaning I suddenly had 2 survivors down and one of them was on Death Hook, and Jonah for some reason ended up bleeding out a couple seconds later. This was the exact situation I needed to be in to try and get back into this match. I probably wasn't going to if Ace decided to go on the other side of the map and hide there, but it could still have happened. However, This is the part where I made probably the biggest mistake of this entire match, completely forgetting about this hook right here. I don't know how I did it, I literally hooked someone on there earlier, but had I remembered about it, I would have gotten Jill up to it and have been able to go and make onto a different hook, then pressured Jonah and Ace before they could have done anything and snowballed harder. But instead I tried to hook her on the outside hook, which allowed Jill to escape. And while it was a short chase, Meg also had Unbreakable, meaning that free kill was now gone, and 30 more seconds were added to my timer. That was a disastrous fumble that cost me what little chance I had. After all of that, the match began to wrap up. I hooked the Jonah, who went down under a hook. I saw Meg's aura with friends, which showed her trying to hide into a locker, way to use your second chance buddy, and Ace did the normal thing of actually saving Jill, before going down next to the pallet that took out Meg a long time ago. Ultimately, Jill would go over to the west side of the map, and after a minute of us both fumbling about looking for the hatch, she would end up finding it, ending this match with 3 kills, a time of 8 minutes, 48 seconds, and some very angry survivors, though with each other rather than me. What a very interesting match that was, with a lot of room for improvement. Ignoring the minute at the very end, being completely honest, I wasn't trying as hard as I should have been. We had about 4 to 5 mistakes, with each adding about 5 to 10 minutes onto the timer, which each on their own isn't that bad, but looking at it all together definitely added up, though easily the biggest mistake was with hooking Jill. All of this wasn't helped by RPD itself, since a lot of the time was wasted getting back and forth between the main area and the stairway, adding about 10 seconds each time I had to traverse it, which was a lot since people kept going down on the east side, while the others were hammering away the gens in the main hall. Though despite my many mistakes, this was actually the one major thing I did do fairly well this match. I was able to create a situation where survivors weren't using the west side of the map. First I ever ended up getting into the west side was the record room, so by keeping the survivors on the east side, I got to make use of both this being the smaller side of the map and the stronger one. Had they properly played the west wing, I probably would have been in a lot more trouble. The second match saw me on Fractured Cowshed, and immediately it went a lot worse than the RPD match. In comparison to my 2-second spotting of Meg that match, it took me over 40 seconds and a lap around the map before I found someone, since I figured someone was more likely to spawn a bit further away from me compared to the straight ahead like they did here. Pretty bad start, though I did manage to injure Jonah within 10 seconds of spawning him. Oh shit, this is the same guy from last match. And so is the Ace. Guess these guys were also Swift. Unfortunately, I played this extremely badly, being extremely aggressive with my second bound and missing, doing some pretty poor mind games, and probably the most embarrassing of all, attempting to outplay the cow tree pallet instead of just breaking it and forcing him elsewhere, all of which added an entire minute to the timer. Yeah, this was looking to be an extremely rough second round. I was gonna need a miracle to happen, and it didn't look like that was going to happen, because as soon as I hooked Jonah, I was greeted with the knowledge that my obsession was on the complete opposite side of the map, making the aura being exposed pretty unimpactful. Thankfully I knew Ace was nearby and was able to down him pretty quickly, and bounced right onto Tori shortly after for a quick chase. I now had 2 people on hook and saw Sable was not coming over to help, so I went over to where I knew Jonah was and put on some pressure, getting him back to injured. This was my way to not only get back into this match, but also deal with Sable being in the corner alone. If I managed to chase and injure Jonah, she'd be forced to come over and try to save the others. And with how I was positioned, I could have easily interrupted her before she got one of them off the hook, adding onto the pressure even more. But that wasn't what I did. Even though I got an early hit on Jonah, and I could see a crow flying off in the distance, I figured I could down Jonah quickly enough for it to be worth it. It took me an entire minute to get the second hit. Sure, he went down into the basements, but I lost so much pressure that I pretty much sabotaged my chances for success. The only good thing that came out of this was the fact that he stunned me, which allowed me to get the obsession off of Sable and onto someone I was actually chasing. But it was a hollow victory. I did get the jump on Ace afterwards thanks to this, but I was just so off my game at this point. I was using my bounds very poorly, playing loops extremely sloppy, and had lost a significant amount of time that I pretty much wasn't going to get it back into this. There was some positives still though, as the survivors didn't play perfectly themselves, and I did get some quick downs and hits. There were these pallets around the outside of the jungle gyms that were extremely weak, which did give me some easy hits. And even as the survivors did try to break off them, I was able to catch up to them very quickly. Plus, while the main building was a massive pain point, the god pallet was completely useless thanks to my vaulting, letting me get some very easy hits. Probably the biggest benefit though was who Friends to the End made the obsession, as it switched back and forth between Jonah and Ace, which allowed me to get them out fairly early. That's actually something interesting to bring up because tunneling out our survivor isn't generally a nice thing to do, though there is actually a specific perk to doing it on Wesker, and it actually ties back into what I mentioned briefly earlier about his infection and slugging. Basically the way it works is that when you grab a survivor, they gain 20 points of infection, and gain 0.8 points every second. Once the survivor reaches 100, they become fully infected, making it so that your slam instantly downs them, and they are hindered by 4%. Both of these buffs are massive since it not only saves your time in chase, but being able to instantly down someone saves so much time. The trade-off, however, is that whenever you hook a survivor, they are set to 1 point of infection. So with the current infection rates, it would take a survivor about 125 seconds to reach in full infection, 2 full minutes, and they can just use a spray can to cleanse it. Not something you want to try to rely on to save time in most cases, but in a case like this, it would have been. If a survivor is progressing passively with their infection, and you instead go after someone else, that means you're not wasting time waiting for them to be primed for the grab. And you could easily get the unhooked survivor out early, meaning the other survivors are more likely to die. Remember what I said earlier about average chases for survivors? 30 seconds per hook was the goal, which is a minute 30 for each survivor. But what if we take out someone early and are able to snowball? A single chase against another survivor at that point would be able to seal their fate, meaning if they died on their first hook, we would shave an entire minute off of a timer. Obviously this is not something that I wanted to do directly, especially given the existence of anti-tunneling perks punishing this, but if the situation I was in gave me a reason to leave the infected survivor to go after someone off of hook, or interrupt and unhook, then I think it was best for the match. And looking over the footage, that was absolutely the best choice given this match. Jonah got unhooked around 2 minutes 27 seconds, and I got the hit on him at 3 minutes 23 seconds. He was more than halfway progressed with his infection, becoming fully infected about 20 seconds later. And since I had 2 people on hook, if I went to stop Sable, then he would be put into a massive pickle due to the infection timer. He'd need to run over and save Ace, since he was only a few seconds away from hitting stage 2, but had he had done this, he wouldn't have been able to both cleanse the infection and heal up before I could have potentially hit him. Hell, if I managed to force Sable off, and slugged her, I could have interrupted them before they got any healing done, meaning I could have snowballed right there into a victory despite how bad the start was. But I didn't. Instead I took a bad chase with Cobb Salad the Jonah main, and threw away this attempt. Nothing really interesting happened for the rest of the match. I was kind of on autopilot during the last chase, so I wasn't too concerned about the time. I did manage to get the last survivor though this time, ending the match with 10 minutes 43 seconds for a 4 kill. After that, I decided to call it for the night, since I was not doing my best, and I wanted to play against different people, since it seemed like the match pool was very shallow with 2v8s. So I returned the next day, and was ready to try this challenge once more, with my first match of the day and third one overall. On one of the worst maps for killers. Man, I'm really starting to consider those map offerings. 30 seconds later, we got into our first chase. I did eat an unnecessary blind which struck me with both Champion of Light and Residual Manifest, but a short dash a few seconds later got me the down, which I honestly felt good about. Even got the achievement for downing someone who recently blinded you. I was then able to hook her in the basement, and shortly afterwards get a swift down on Dwight, who ran straight into my loving arms. And I even tricked Fang into dropping the pallet. I also made a brief mistake trying to carry him around before remembering, oh yeah, I should switch to kill her, which does leave Shaq pallet up for a bit. Should have baited the drop and then let go of Dwight to break it. This did become a slight issue seconds later after I slapped Michaela, oops, when I chased Fang and she escaped over it. I also fucked up my first dash, but at least I hit the second one. This leads into a... what the fuck? Into a chase around the pallet by Shaq that I actually did win due to her not hugging the loop so tightly. And she DC'd. We now have 3 survivors on the ground at 2.5 minutes. You know what that means? Time to pick up a survivor and let Felix get them out scot-free. Actually, no. Because I wasn't going to make the same mistakes I made like 2 games ago. Instead, I'm going to leave the bot on the ground and chase Felix. And you know what? I completely fumbled it by getting stunned. But hey, I didn't make the same mistake I did before. And I also wasn't going to make the same mistake from last match, committing to a chase when I could be applying a pressure to the down survivors. So I went back and downed the bot quickly again before chasing the Michaela, where I got screwed over by invisible walls. Thankfully, it didn't add too much to the time, as she went down right in front of a hook for me to place her on, and Felix was kind enough to give me a free hit. And unlike last chase, I was able to down him quickly. So all we have left is Dwight, who should be going to pick up the Fangbot and Oh, he just ran into me. Well, now we have everyone on the ground, but that still doesn't mean the match is over, as a single unbreakable conviction. Oh, they don't have anything. So I guess that is it, huh? With all survivors ready to be hooked and the last survivor DCing, we end the match with 4 minutes 30 seconds by the time all survivors have left, and 5 minutes 11 seconds by the time we're out of the match. I'm not gonna lie, that felt a bit anticlimactic. Like, I was expecting this to take way longer to be completed, but here I am finishing it on the 3rd game, which was not how I expected this to pan out. I don't even feel like this was unearned like the first match would have been. We all played the match to the fullest and this was the outcome, even if there were some places that I messed up. However, the craziest part is that when I looked back at the match to see where I could have improved, I think the mistakes that happened led to this outcome. Getting blinded by Mikaela was pretty sloppy, but if I didn't, she might have tried running to a different loop instead of running back in the shack, which allowed me to place her into the basement, which instigated a lot of this. Slapping Mikaela did waste a bit of time, but her mending led to her not noticing me and getting a free down on her. Getting stunned by Felix sucked, but had things gone as I hoped, I might not have gone back and dealt with Dwight picking up the other two. Even getting screwed over by the giant hitbox ended up going in my favor since Mikaela ended up in front of the hook, making Felix's Sabo attempt useless and giving me a free hit on him. Sure, there are definitely things I could have improved, but at the end of the day, the thing that made this match perfect was a lot of what made it imperfect. Which is kind of funny to think about since the point of this challenge was to push myself to improve at Wesker. But maybe that's just an indication you don't need to be perfect to improve. For now, I think that's this little challenge done, not only with the objective, but also improving at the killer. I hope you all enjoyed this little strange video I did. My name is Era, and that's the end of my interesting little story for you.